Have you ever played a game with tank controls that made you wanna do this? Did you ever want to catch up on a classic, but gave up immediately because you were afraid of destroying your controller in an act of impulsive rage? Then you will be pleased to hear that we are seeing more and more re-releases of older games with a new control scheme built in, like for example the recently released Tomb Raider Remaster. But it is undeniable that tank controls are a fundamental aspect of these games.
Ah boy, here we go.
They are such a central gameplay element that every other design choice during its initial development was unavoidably influenced by them.
Flee while you can, you worthless bug.
Of course, publishers insisted on including new controls anyway. They didn't want to scare off new players. Oh, pardon me, sir. I meant to say customers. With this untamable relic from the past. That's why the following questions have stuck with me since I played the Tomb Raider Remaster. How good are modern alternatives to tank controls? Do the solutions developers have come up with really enhance these games without compromising the original experience?
You see where this is going?
So without further ado, I'm Grumpy Snorly, and let's find an answer together in this video. Let's go! To show the current state of this topic and how relevant it still is in the present, I looked at 3 titles released either in 2023 or this year. And obviously because I really like these 3 games, namely Resident Evil 4, because it's the epitome of a perfect remake.
Suit yourself, stranger.
Metroid Prime because, oh, look at those graphics. They are so delicious Nintendo should have called it a remake in the first place. And the aforementioned Tomb Raider Remaster, because that literally got the boulder rolling for me, so to speak. In the case of RE4 and Metroid Prime, I also choose those because they are in themselves already further developments of this control scheme, and no longer match with the simple basic form as we know it from the classic old school Resident Evil games. And before anyone gets all whiny trying to tell me,
"But Snorly, Metroid Prime doesn't have tank controls."
Here's my short definition. You use the left stick to go forward and backwards, and turn around your own axis. Literally everything a tank does to move around, all combined on one tiny control element of your input device. You press a shoulder button to aim freely, but are forced to stand still. Isn't it nice that in these 2 titles, free aiming really meant free aiming? What set Prime and RE4 apart from games with more classic tank controls is that they have already outgrown their limitations. Gone are the pre-rendered backgrounds from the 90s. Hello, fully 3D rendered future. What really makes us perceive these titles so differently is their perspective. The over-the-shoulder and first-person perspectives are not only great for immersion, they literally bring you closer to the action. They allow for mechanics that let you interact with the environment faster and react to surprising dangers in a more versatile way. We definitely play 2D Metroid for very different reasons than Prime, but before Dread, action was certainly not one of them. These games are faster and more dynamic than, let's say, Onimusha, a game that already tried to deliver fast-paced action, but was slowed down not only by its tank controls, but also by its fixed camera angles. What I'm trying to say is that it's because of our association that we can't see the similarities between these 2 faster and diverse titles and the slow and sluggish gameplay of the older ones, even though their core was always the same. RE4 was mostly criticized for the reason that you are not able to shoot and move at the same time, but the point is that the whole combat system, the attack animations, their timings, and the movement speed of Leon's adversaries, everything was exactly designed for this limitation, and the player just had to get used to it. For Metroid Prime, this problem was never very severe, as it borrowed the lock-on system from The Legend of Zelda, and aiming with the shoulder button was only needed to target enemies at a higher ground or scannable objects. Besides, this problem has already been solved in the Wii version, as it was actually its whole gimmick, that you can turn around and aim with the Wii remote at any time, at least until you have destroyed the entire interior of your grandma's living room in the process.
I just don't want you to pick on me no more, Grandma.
You know, with all that swinging and flailing around, things can break. Let me know in the comments what sort of things have fallen victim to your unintentional destructive rage while playing. There's plenty of room for your stories below my video, so feel free to share them with us. The Wii Remote is one thing, but what could you do to improve this on a normal controller? The answer is as simple as it is brilliant. Just give it the same controls as any other game played in first person.
Hooray.
The remastered version of Metroid Prime not only looked amazingly good and made this classic playable on the go for the first time, but it also controlled pretty well. Looking around freely with the right stick makes for a faster game flow. I think this control implementation is excellent, not only because it makes the game more accessible, but also because it doesn't change any of the gameplay challenges. The platforming sections feel fair, and the boss encounters, for better or for worse, still work the same as before, without gaining any annoying twist or becoming easier in some cheesy way. The game just benefits from it, and that's what we want to see when it comes to remasters like this. But the fact of the matter is, Metroid Prime never was and never wanted to be a shooter. And even today, with the new controls of the remaster, the game still feels just like what it always was, an action adventure. I know this topic is very divisive, and I sometimes wonder if I'm the only one who prefers tank controls. Obviously, there seems to be an interest in alternatives, otherwise the developers wouldn't even bother. Or do you think it's just because tank controls have such a bad reputation? Let me know what you think in the comments, and tell me which option you go for if you have a choice. And while you're at it, you might as well leave a like and subscribe. It would be so wonderful if you help me reach my first goal of 200 subscribers. With RE4, it's a completely different matter than with Metroid Prime, as it got a complete remake that strikes the perfect balance between rebuilding and reimagining all the things that made the original a masterpiece. The OG version already had such fluid movement. Everything in its combat meshed so smoothly. It was the closest thing to perfection that tank controls could ever get. But how do you improve on something that is almost perfect?
Got something that might interest you.
You remove the only point of criticism. Now you can aim and walk at the same time, and move in all 4 directions, which often allows to escape from a dicey situation. That's all the developers had to do, change these 2 little things in the basic movement. After all, they wanted to stay as close as possible to the original combat system, and they succeeded. Although that certainly does not mean Leon has less to fear from the merciless Ganados.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me.
Because all the things I mentioned earlier regarding the enemy's behavior have been adapted to Leon's newfound freedom of movement. These Ganados are now more aggressive than ever. You will be whacked around the head with one axe after another, but thankfully only until the siesta starts, and suddenly everyone seems to be off for bingo or something? The initial idea of the RE4 original was to replace the dark, gruesome horror of its predecessors with panicked fear. As long as you hadn't yet familiarized yourself with the combat system, the game accomplished exactly that. Once you were properly warmed up, you had so much control over what was happening that there wasn't much panic in the air anymore. The current version is a completely different story in this regard. As this is a remake, the addition of new features has added an extra layer of depth to the feel of the game without making it feel like a completely new combat system. Especially the introduction of stealth attacks and the counter mechanics and everything else regarding the knife. Make sure that you have to approach every encounter more strategically than in the original. Even if you have managed to master all the new mechanics, your enemies are still a force to be reckoned with. So much so that you will never have a calm heartbeat.
Some say that it leaves forever this road that I lose you on every time. Some say
Fortunately, our last game is a little quieter, because playing Tomb Raider is a calming experience. Losing yourself in these mystical sights and letting your desire for adventure take over still works so fantastically today. If you haven't seen my last video, in which I talk in detail about these aspects and why I fell in love with this game, you should do so right away. Okay, let's do the joke again. Some people can play Dark Souls with a dance pad. Or with the Donkey Kong Kongas? If anyone remembers that GameCube curiosity. Some people can't play Tomb Raider at all. I totally get it, guys. But you still shouldn't play Tomb Raider with the modern controls for one simple reason. They are broken and conflict with all the basic gameplay elements. But to understand why, you first have to know what made Tomb Raider so special as a platformer. You have probably noticed that the whole level design in Tomb Raider consists of square blocks. These cover the landscape like a grid and allow to immediately recognize where you can climb or jump to. This is called the grid system. You are taught the basic mechanics in Lara's mansion, which can be applied to all skill-based challenges. Basically the recipe for 90% of the game. You align yourself with the ledge, and if you want to make a long jump, take one step back to get a running start. But with the modern controls, you can't do this backward step without pulling your weapons. Otherwise, Lara turns around on the spot, which ruins her whole positioning. This also happens all the time during combat, as you really have to wait until the weapon draw animation comes to an end before you are allowed to move, which no one will do in the heat of the battle. Because of this backward step, you always know when Lara is going to jump, as she has to run exactly one grid box square to do so. In the modern control scheme, she needs fewer steps to get in the air, which in combination with her constant back and forth spinning, actively works against the grid system. This feels as if the developers wanted to completely eliminate it. So I really wanted to find out why. Is it accessibility for new players? Or did they want to increase the speed at which you navigate Lara through the levels? They succeeded with the latter to a certain extent, because with the tank controls, every single interaction takes what feels like an eternity, and with the modern controls, you get a faster movement flow, but unfortunately at the expense of precision, and everything feels very spongy. Since the modern control system also suffers from countless camera problems, such as orientating itself upwards while swimming, I wanted to try something that I wouldn't normally do. Ooh, this feels really hard for me to say, and you have to be strong now, but I actually played this game with keyboard and mouse.
You what? What could have possessed you to be so stupid?
But then all of a sudden, it clicked. Controlling the camera yourself all the time feels counterintuitive for the old school Tomb Raider games, but at least the modern controls have a few less problems this way, and you don't drown all the time or fall to your death unintentionally. But my main criticisms remain. The modern controls break with the grid system, are imprecise and spongy, but if you want to experience the game a little differently, it's kind of okay. And at least I know now why the developers made them as they are. I think the main reason is almost certainly the implementation of a mouse and keyboard functionality. To break it finally down, I think we have reached a point where a lot of developers know what they are doing when it comes to tank controls. With Metroid Prime, the most obvious solution seemed to be the best. Resident Evil got a complete overhaul with its remake, but it's still noticeable how this evolution is built on a foundation of tank controls that were already almost perfected. They meant well with Tomb Raider, but only delivered mediocre results. Feel free to let me know your opinion on the topic, and let's discuss it in the comments. Please leave a like and subscribe. See you next time, yours truly, Grumpy Snorley.